This, my friends, is a ground sheet, also known as a ground fly and also known as a footprint. No matter what you call it, this is a very important piece of gear that pros carry with them every single time they go out on a backpacking trip with a tent. An inexperienced camper or backpacker may not use one of these with their tents, and that's because they simply do not know how they work or why you should use one. In this episode, I'm going over the reasons why experienced backpackers and campers, pros, use a ground sheet every single time with their tents. When it comes to camping and backpacking, most people purchase a tent to keep them safe and protected from the elements. And if you have ever purchased a tent before, you know that tents are expensive. They are an investment. Consider this, your average good quality tent can cost as much as $200. Mid-range tents run $200 to $500, with high-end tents being $800 to over $1,000. Because your shelter is so important and also so expensive, it's important to make sure to make that product last as long as possible. You need to take the steps that are required to prolong its lifespan. One of the easiest ways of protecting that investment is right here with a ground sheet. By the way, everybody, in this episode, I may refer to these as ground sheets, ground flies, or even footprints. All of the terms apply, each is correct. Anyways, this item right here is what this episode is all about. I will be covering what they are, how to use them correctly, why they're important, and I'll be going over why the pros use them and the noobs don't. First things first, let's go over what a footprint is and what it does and why it's so important. So number one, right off the bat, protection. This is going to protect the bottom of your tent from whatever is on the ground. We're talking about the items and debris that you can see and the items and debris that you can't. Footprints will protect the bottom of the tent from abrasion. They will also protect from sharp pointy sticks, roots, broken glass, whatever it may be that's on the ground. It might be a tiny little twig that you do not see that you put your tent down. As soon as you hop inside of that tent, it punches through the floor. Or maybe over a long period of time, you've set your tent up over and over on top of dirt, rocks, roots, limbs, and whatnot. That repetitive abrasion slowly removes the protective coating on your tent, or worse, actually puts a hole in your tent. You have to keep in mind, everybody, when it comes to your tent, it's not the fabric that keeps the water out. It's the coatings on the fabric that keeps the water out of your tent. So if you don't use a ground sheet, you're exposing that material to the ground. You're exposing that coating to rocks and roots and sticks. Every single time that you go out, every time that you move around inside of your tent, that material is rubbing and it's wearing off that coating. Another huge benefit of using a ground sheet is that you're going to keep your shelter clean. You're protecting your tent from mud, from dirt, from pine needles, from sap. This is an important reason why I personally use a ground sheet with every single tent that I use. I'm doing my best to protect it and also to keep it clean, because when I take it home, when I'm drying it off, I don't want to have to wash the bottom of that tent. I want everything to be as smooth and as quick as possible. I want to set that tent up, I want to let it dry, I want to clean it out, and I want to put it up. I don't want to spend all day removing tree sap from the bottom of my tent, because having to clean that material can be a true nightmare. While separating your tent from the dirt, from the debris, and so on, you're keeping your tent as fresh as possible. You're keeping it as new feeling as possible, and you're lessening the amount of maintenance that you have to do in the future. Point number 3 deals with site selection for your tent. You can easily take your ground sheet, throw it down on the ground, and you can determine whether or not your tent is going to fit inside of that space. That way you don't have to take your tent, set it up, only to discover, hey, something's not right, it's not going to fit. This goes back to making your life nice and easy. You can spend less time fooling around with your gear and more time enjoying nature. This step may not sound that important to you, but it's going to save you a lot of time and frustration in the future, which is important. Next, everybody, when you use one of these ground sheets, you put them on the ground, you put your tent on top. This is going to lessen the amount of condensation that forms inside of your tent because you have that protective barrier on the ground. It is separating your tent from the cold ground underneath, and also all of the moisture that may be in the soil or on the grass. Additionally, that ground sheet is going to separate your tent from the cold, wet dirt, grass, and so on, from the warm air on the inside of your tent. And again, this is going to lessen condensation forming inside of your tent. Next, everybody, for cold weather camping, this is going to be invaluable, and that's because it offers an additional layer of protection. It's a separation layer between your tent and the snow underneath. This is going to lessen the amount of cold air coming up through your tent, and at the same time, it's going to lower condensation. These are the reasons why pros use these every single time with their tent setups. Now let's talk about why noobs don't use them. Primarily, it's because of weight. They believe that using a footprint is going to add a substantial amount of weight to their loadout. and that's simply not the case. There are plenty of ground sheets that are out on the market today that are extremely lightweight. For an example, this is a ground sheet made out of plastic that I purchased from Mountain Laurel Designs. It is extremely inexpensive. It's strong. It lasts a long time, and it is super, super light. This may look like it takes up quite a bit of space inside of my pack, but it doesn't. This is a very small item that can be easily compressed. It can be rolled up. How about that? It's about the size of a hot dog. Here's another example of a ground sheet that is ultra lightweight and also very compressible. This is seal nylon. It's made from seal nylon. It is very lightweight, takes up no space at all, and is very effective. What we have here is the more traditional ground sheet that you will find for most backpacking tents. As you all can see here, it's quite a bit larger. This is also quite a bit heavier than these two options here. Most tents do not come with a ground sheet, but some less expensive tents do. With those tents that do include a ground sheet, more than likely it will be like this. With the companies that do not include ground sheets, generally you can find a ground sheet that will fit your tent, and it will typically be just like this. Now everybody, I have some points to go over concerning ground sheets. Number one are the materials. You can find ground sheets in a wide range of materials. Polyester, nylon, seal nylon, Dyneema, plastic, Tyvek, so on and so forth. Which one do you select? Well, that really is up to you. It really does depend on what you want to do and how much you want to spend. If you want something that's ultra light, you're going to be looking at Dyneema, seal nylon, plastic. If you want something that's inexpensive, polyester. If you want something that's a little bit stronger, nylon. With polyester ground sheets, they tend to be inexpensive, but the weight goes up a little bit. Then you have nylon. A little bit more expensive, a little bit lighter, but stronger. With plastic ground sheets, they're inexpensive, not as strong, ultra light, and require a little bit more care. For example, if you're going to use a piece of plastic as a ground sheet, you do need to take some time and clean up the site before you lay down that piece of plastic. Make sure that there's no twigs, rocks, sticks, nothing like that. You do have to be gentle with it because it's a piece of plastic. With Tyvek, there are a few points that you need to consider. First off, it tends to be inexpensive. It can be loud though, it can be strong, and you have to use it the right way to prevent moisture from coming through it. With the other materials that we talked about already, they are waterproof. They will not allow any water to come through the materials, but that's not the case with Tyvek. You have to use it the right way. Those are the basic points to consider when it comes to materials. What I recommend is that you take some time and research the right material for you. That way you can make a really good decision. Again, it really does depend on the aspects and traits that you're looking for, plus how much you want to spend. For an example, how important is going like ultra light to you? Do you need something that's ultra light and also super strong? Or could you go with like a piece of plastic that's ultra light but somewhat delicate? Again, these are just points that you have to consider. You may be thinking to yourself that you don't need a ground sheet because you're going to set your tent up on very soft surfaces such as grass, such as sand. Go back to the benefits of using a ground sheet. First off, you're not only protecting the bottom of the tent from abrasion, but you're also keeping it clean. Something I want you all to consider here is that most tent companies make a ground sheet a footprint for a tent that they're selling, and they're going to sell those for a premium price. At times, they can cost a quarter of the amount that the entire tent costs. That's ridiculous. These companies are going to sell these footprints for $40, $50, all the way up to $80. I personally have never purchased a ground sheet that a company was selling because one, they're very heavy, and two, they're very expensive. You can always find a lighter weight, stronger, and less expensive ground sheet on the open market. Aftermarket ground sheets, while they may not fit your tent perfectly, they can be tucked in and they're going to work just as well, if not better. And they're going to save you a lot of money. I just mentioned a very important point. When it comes to tents and the companies that make them and the footprints that they're selling specifically for those tents, those footprints are going to fit those tents perfectly. They're going to be perfectly shaped for the bottom of your tent. When it comes to aftermarket footprints, they're not going to fit your tent perfectly. The odds are you're going to have multiple inches of material sticking out from underneath your tent. That's where you take the material and simply tuck it in underneath your shelter. Or if it's not going to rain, you can use that extra material to kneel on. It makes a great surface right in front of the door that you can kneel on, you don't have to get your knees wet, and you can access your tent. If going ultralight is important, you can always cut down those aftermarket footprints to make them fit your tent perfectly. As you can see there, everybody, when it comes to footprints, you have a lot of options. You could spend a lot, you could spend a little. It really does depend, again, on what you're looking for. What's important to you? I personally use this piece of plastic that you see here for just about every single trip that I go on. It's lightweight, it's strong enough, it usually lasts me 2 or 3 years before I have to replace it, and once it has some holes in it, I can recycle it. Also, it should be mentioned that this is very easy to repair. All you have to do is just take a piece of tape, cover up the hole, and you're done. Talking about how to use your ground sheet, it is very simple. Look around the area that you're considering to camp in. Make sure to check the trees for widowmakers and old rotten limbs. Once you have a site selected, clean it up somewhat. Even if you're using a piece of nylon, a piece of polyester, or so on, Clean it up, get all the rocks and sticks out of the way. And once you've done that, place the ground sheet on the ground. Then you grab your tent and you set it up on top, and just like that, you are protecting your investment. You're protecting the shelter that's going to protect you from the bugs and from the elements. This is what an experienced camper and backpacker will do every single time with their shelter, and what a noob won't do. As a pro tip for you all, some ground sheets have straps in the corners, maybe even buckles, some have grommets. You can use those connection points to make tarps out of these ground sheets. That means in an emergency situation, you can string one of these up as a tarp and it will protect you. Or you can use it as a wall. Let's say that you have a tarp overhead, you can use that ground sheet to make a makeshift wall. That's going to block wind and also rain. In this episode, we've gone over the reasons why you should use a ground sheet with your tent every single time. It's the smart thing to do. It's going to make your life very, very simple. It's going to protect your investment. And when you get done from your adventure, you're going to have less cleanup to do. There's going to be less maintenance to do. There's no reason not to use a ground sheet with your tent. And that's because ground sheets don't have to be expensive and they don't have to be heavy. For this episode, everybody, I am done. Make sure to comment down below, share your thoughts. What do you all think about using a ground sheet with your tent? If for some reason that you refuse to use a ground sheet, make sure to comment down below and to share those reasons. I'm curious to hear them. For now, folks, I am done. Hit the like button before you go. It helps a lot. If you want to support the channel, you can do so. Patreon, YouTube, you can join the Wolf Pack. Also, make sure to check out my second YouTube channel, A Quiet Place Adventures. Just like on this channel, every single week there's a brand new adventure for you to enjoy. Everyone, take care, be well, strength and honor.